in a way. They complement each other, they complete each other. One cannot stand, the other cannot sit, you know. It's that kind of a, you know, comic complementarity, as it were. But then the play entirely gets driven by the conflict between these two characters and their bickering, as I say. Nothing is funnier than unhappiness, that sentence. There's an interesting gloss there. There are many sentences that are relayed in the text. I would like you to keep a note of this, how one character says something first, and then another character echoes it, or another character relays it. These relaying functions are interesting. So it's actually Nell who says this for the first time. Nothing is funnier than unhappiness. And then let's look at the gloss. Nell says, yes, it's the most comical thing in the world. And we laugh with a will in the beginning, but it's always the same thing. Yes, it's like the funny story we have heard too often. We still find it funny, but we don't laugh anymore. Haven't you anything else to say to me? So this idea of telling the same story worse and worse, and telling the same story so many times ad nauseum that it becomes impossible to call that a funny story anymore. যেটা বলা হয় না যে একই একটা মজার কথা বারবার বলতে থাকলে একটা সময় সেটার মজার থাকে না, এবং মজার মধ্যেও কৌতুকের মধ্যেও সবসময় একটা ট্র্যাজেডি থাকে কোথাও একটা, যেমন আবার ট্র্যাজেডির মধ্যেও একটা কৌতুক থাকে। এই ধরনের একটা শোপেনহাওয়ারিয়ান একটা রিফ্লেকশন সবসময় বেকেটে আছে। যেমন শোপেনহাওয়ার বলেছিলেন যে কাছ থেকে দেখলে জীবন একরকম, দূর থেকে দেখলে আরেক রকম। Anyway, I won't go into that. Let me just try and finish this. Nag has that famous inset narration of the English tailor's story. টেইলরকে অনেক দিন ধরে একটা জামা বানাতে দেওয়া হচ্ছে, সে জামাটা বানাতে পারছে না, প্রচুর সময় লেগে যাচ্ছে, তারপরে একটা খারাপ জামা বানাচ্ছে, তাকে যখন কাস্টমার বকছে রেগে গিয়ে, তখন তাতে টেইলর বলছে, বাট দেন কাস্টমার বলছে যে 7 দিনে তো ভগবান পৃথিবী বানিয়ে দিয়েছিলেন, তা আপনি কি এত মাস হয়ে গেল একটা জামা বানাতে পারছেন না? তার উত্তরে টেইলর বলছে, বাট লুক এট দ্য ওয়ার্ল্ড and look at my trousers. অর্থাৎ যে ভগবান যে পৃথিবীটা বানিয়েছেন সেটা কি ভয়ঙ্কর সেটা দেখো, আর আমার ট্রাউজারটা এতদিন সময় লেগেছে, 6 মাস সময় লেগেছে, কিন্তু কত সুন্দর এটা দেখো। So there are these gags or these joke-like stories built into the narrative of the play. These inset narrations are interesting because they're always there in Beckett. In Beckett's plays as well as in his fictions, you always have these inset narrations. I mean, Nag's story is one such inset narration. But there's always a self-reflexive storytelling. As Nag is telling the story, he's aware of how well he's telling it or how badly he's telling it. Like he keeps saying, I tell this story worse and worse. That's the funniness, but also the evaporation of the funniness. ক্রমশ গল্পটা আরো খারাপ ভাবে বলা হচ্ছে যাতে সেটা আর কৌতুকদায়ক থাকছে না। The entire play in one sense is about Ham ordering Clove for things, and Clove going into the kitchen or going into the other part of the shelter and bringing things back from whatever, I mean from a dog, a toy dog, to almost anything else, to oil the casters, I mean, whatever. I mean, it's just a classic master-slave routine that gets played out throughout. At some point when Clove has to take Ham for a round, again, you saw all those sketches, right? I mean, how meticulously Beckett planned all of that. So there's a point where he's taken to these windows because he wants to, feel the light on his face, the light from the earth window. But then he's also taken on this tour where he hugs the walls and he says, these are hollow bricks. And there's a very Sartrean sentence there where Ham says, beyond is the other hell. I mean, the Sartre echo is, in that famous sentence, hell is other people. Beyond is the other hell is the sentence in Endgame, which echoes Sartre's sentence, hell is other people. And, Ham's insecurity to come back to the center. Each time Clove brings him back, he wants to reassure himself whether he's bang in the center. He keeps saying this to Clove. Am I in the center? Am I in the center? Bang in the center? So again, it's important. The word Clove uses to talk about the world outside is corpsed. Again, a very interesting word. This dead world, but it's not entirely dead either. It's like that tree in Waiting for Godot, which suddenly blooms with a couple of leaves in the second act. Similarly, in this corpsed world where there's no wave on the sea, no gulls in the horizon, suddenly there appears this small boy who could come into the refuge and become another clove. So there's constantly this idea of a kind of survival of the species and a recurrent notion of, change, as it were. So for example, there's a moment where they catch a flea and Ham says, well, there are still fleas, kill that flea. That might lead to a whole bunch of new fleas. So there's always this insecurity about survival, anxiety of survival, as well as possibly an implicit desire for the survival of the species. The Darwinian echoes, I think, work quite well with the biblical undertone of the play. Just make a move on and finish. For example, that flea, but humanity might start from there all over again. Catch him for the love of God. So they're talking about the flea here. Ham wants to make this raft, wants to make a boat, and let the waves carry him away to other mammals. So there are all these Darwinian and biblical echoes. Cruelty, as I said, Ham has this very strong sadistic notion of sort of torturing the other. I'll not read the entire speech, but if you could locate it in the play text, there's that longish speech of Ham's where he says, one day, says this to Clove, one day you'll be blind like me. You'll be sitting here, a speck in the void, in the dark. I mean, I'm just skipping sentences here. Infinite emptiness will be all around you. All the resurrected dead of all the ages wouldn't fill it. And there you will be, like a little bit of grit in the middle of the steppe. Yes, one day you'll know what it is. You'll be like me, except that you won't have anyone with you, because you won't have had pity on anyone, and because there won't be anyone left to have pity on. So this sort of very sardonic tone is something that Ham often, adopts. There's a poignancy about it as well. I would say it's a very soft kind of a sadism, as it were, which is also poignant and melancholic in its own way. So he's talking about the fact that he took in Clove. He had pity on him, which is why he has some company. But then he also abuses his, adopted son, as it were, throughout the play, as we see. So it's a very difficult play. It's easy to judge these characters, but let us not. But at the same time, it is a play about cruelty, not necessarily in the Antonio Artaud fashion, but it is a play which is thematically about cruelty, among other things. There are all these references to the light extinguishing and so on, and biographical references like the character Mother Peg, who is perhaps modeled after Peggy Sinclair, Beckett's cousin with whom he had an affair. There are these references to a madman. Ham is like a storyteller. Ham tells many stories throughout the play. He tells the story of a madman, an engraver. As Dirk van Hoel notes, this is an important addition. So the word engraver wasn't there in the French text. Beckett adds it in the English text. And there's something interesting here, because the word engraver has the word grave in it. So there's an association, Hoel says, between art and death. The madman is also an engraver. And what is his madness? In the asylum, so this is Ham telling a story about his madman engraver friend, his painter engraver friend. When he went to meet his friend in the asylum, and he was, showing him all the beautiful nature outside the window, all the flowers and so on, he could only see ashes. And again, ashes return us to the ash cans, the parent as waste, this ash can on stage, the dustbins that we see, the dustbin of the unconscious, as it were. As I said, the humor is always there. I mean, well, sooner or later I'd start to sting. So, I mean, the play is about this ending. I mean, Clove wants to leave, but can Clove leave Ham? He wants to leave Ham, and yet he cannot seem to be able to get himself to leave Ham. এটার মধ্যে কিন্তু একটা পোইনেন্সিও আছে। দুজন লোক যারা পরস্পরকে ছেড়ে যেতে চাইছে কিন্তু পারছে না। এই না পারাটার মধ্যে একটা অদ্ভুত vestigial humanityও আছে। Even though Beckett said it's a play much more inhuman than Endgame, and in a certain sense he was right, of course. So they make this plan that, Clove will go away, Ham will whistle, and if Clove doesn't come, Ham has to think Clove is dead. Sorry, Clove is gone. But then Ham says, what if you're just dead in the kitchen? Takon Clove bolche, in that case, I'll start stinking. And Ham says, well, you already stink. So there are these, funny moments, of course. And they finally make it a point to have an alarm clock. So this is the routine at the end, that Clove will go away, Ham will whistle for him, he will not come back, but that does not rest the ambiguity whether Clove has actually left, or has he just died in the kitchen? How will Ham get to know? Ham cannot see, Ham cannot move, he cannot verify. Without Clove, he cannot go to the kitchen as well. So it's difficult for him to know. How would he know? He would know because there's an alarm clock. And that's finally the decision they take. Again, I'm not going to go over that in great detail, but there are these comic gags, But I wanted to draw your attention to the fact that the play is also about the ambiguity of leaving, the impossibility of leaving, the ambiguity of leaving, and there's a certain humanity attached to that. There's this famous chronicle, as I said, which is basically offering a backstory to Clove, how Clove came into the shelter, Clove as a war child. I'll not go over it again. I already mentioned it. But again, we see a certain dynamic of the war there in that very sort of, hungry representation of the war, famished, hungry representation of the war in that scene. Again, it's a self-reflexive narrativity. At many points in this narration of the chronicle, Ham says, oh, well put, there's English for you. So these sentences are important because they make us understand how self-conscious the narrator is while narrating. I'm going to very quickly come to an end now. We've overshot the time. Again, a very famous sentence, use your head, can't you? Use your head, you're on earth, there's no cure for that. So there's this sense of being, bewildered in a bewitched kind of existence, as it were. That's very strongly there. There's a very interesting emotive speech by Nag, where Nag is responding to Ham's sadism. And he says, whom did you call when you were a tiny boy and were frightened in the dark? So we have this very interesting chain of cursing. The way Ham curses his father, he gets it back from his father. And Ham does the same to his adopted son, Clove. So there's a sort of a chain of this, parental cursing that goes on, But Nag's curse or cursing is not very sadistic. In fact, it's quite poignant and moving, as I said. At the end, he says, yes, I hope I'll live till then to hear you calling me like when you were a tiny boy and were frightened in the dark, and I was your only hope. So this is the responsive sadism, as I said, I want to see that moment when you will again be dependent on me as your father, and I would not, return the favor, just as I did when you were a child. So there are these moments of mutual infliction. And this is where I think, again, we could go back to that influence of Batai's relationship with his father and taking care of a dying parent, the complications of that. Clove says he loves order. He loves a world where everything is silent and every object is in its last place, as it were. It's again an important point. Throughout the play, there are these meta-theatrical tropes. Like at some point, Clove says, you don't understand, this is an aside. I'm preparing for my soliloquy. At some point, he says, I hope it's not an underplot, which would continue the play. So as I say, this play is about ending the play as well. I mean, meta-theatrically speaking, this play is about the ending of the play, the end of theater, perhaps in a more general sense. একটা নাটক যেটা নাটক শেষ হওয়ার ব্যাপারে এবং নাটককে কিভাবে শেষ করতে হবে সেটার ব্যাপারে. So again, there's that anti-theatrical sort of strain in the play. I'll just quickly finish now. I'm almost done. Just give me a couple of minutes. Just want to talk about the last.
Please take your time. Please take your time.
Thank you. Thank you. No, I'm also aware of concentration spans and the fact that, online classes, we've been doing it for so long now. I'm aware of the fact that it's quite difficult to follow things beyond the point. But I hope, some of you could go back to the recording later and get the point. Okay, so I'll just come to the last few dialogues now. So there's again Ham, as I said, will keep saying things like "me to play," again reiterating that self-reflexive theatricality. We are getting on. You weep and weep for nothing so as not to laugh, and little by little you begin to grieve. So again, there are all these beautiful and beautifully reflective lines about the intermingling of sorrow and happiness. Like there's this famous moment in Waiting for Godot where Didi and Gogo are talking, and one says, "I'm happy," and the other one says, "What do we do now that we are happy?" We know what to do when we are sad, but ironically, it becomes more difficult to understand what to do when we are happy. Satisfaction is a saturated state. Happiness is a saturated state, whereas unhappiness could radicalize you, could make you do many more things, many more adventurous things. I mean, that's the fun of unhappiness, perhaps. So again, there are all these beautiful, reflections on that when Ham goes into a sort of philosophical tenor of speaking. There's a beautiful image that I do definitely want to read, and it goes back to that Milleside's paradox. Babble, babble, words, like the solitary child who turns himself into children, 2, 3, so as to be together and whisper together in the dark, moment upon moment, pattering down like the millet grains of that old Greek, and all life long you wait for that to mount up to a life. Let's get it over. So again, this beautiful image of words as children, and how one word, the singular, leads to the plural, the collective. One word becomes multiple words in a chain of language, in a signifying chain of language, and they give each other company. It's a very deeply lilting but also melancholic image of words giving each other company as they pluralize, as they beget each other like children. একটা শব্দ থেকে অনেকগুলো শব্দ। বেকেট একজন অত্যন্ত শব্দ সচেতন লেখক, ফলে সবসময় ভাষার এই খেলাগুলো থাকে এবং ল্যাঙ্গুয়েজকে ল্যাঙ্গুয়েজের এগেইনস্টে ইউজ করা, এটা বেকেটের একটা খুব ফেমাস authorial strategy which he used throughout his life to attack language. যেভাবে আমাদের বাংলায় বলতে গেলে কমল কুমার মজুমদার বলেছিলেন যে একজন লেখকের কাজই হলো ভাষাকে ভাষার মাধ্যমে আক্রমণ করা। এরকম একটা পজিশন কিন্তু বেকেটেরও ছিল, স্ট্রং। And we again have that reference to Zeno's paradox, Milleside's, and so on. Let me go on. Yeah, as I said, all these theatrical references to underplot, complications, etc. Almost coming to the end now. Yeah, the last speech. So before Clove leaves, as I say, this play is about the impossibility of leaving. And even at the end, when Beckett inserts that second tableau into the English text, it's a fixed moment when the play comes to an end. We don't know whether Clove actually leaves. When Ham delivers his final speech, Clove's gaze is fixed on Ham. He's dressed for the road. He wants to leave, clearly. But does he leave? We don't know. The play ends in that suspended moment, and Clove seems to be still quite attached to Ham. So maybe Clove doesn't leave. And if he leaves, possibly there will be another Clove, the small boy who's outside in that corpsed world somewhere. So Ham asks Clove to say a few things before he goes, a parting speech or something like that. And Clove delivers a wonderfully complex speech, which I don't have the entire sort of time to go into entirely, but nevertheless, this speech also reminds one of the unnameable. And Beckett had just finished writing the unnameable. Let's remember that. Those of you who may have read Unnameable, or you may know of the play, you may know of the novel, you will perhaps recognize the voice of the Unnameable in this speech. Let me read it in parts. They say to me, "That's love." Yes, yes, not a doubt. Now you see how easy it is. They say to me, "That's friendship." Yes, yes, no question. We found it. They say to me, "Here's the place. Stop. Raise your head and look at all that beauty, that order." They say to me, "Come now. You're not a brute beast." Think about these things, and you will see how all becomes clear and simple. They say to me, what skilled attention they get, all these dying of their wounds. So again, I'm not going to read the entire speech, but it's a speech about socialization, how language disciplines us into social creatures. আমরা সামাজিক প্রাণী হয়ে উঠি ভাষার মাধ্যমে। ভাষার মাধ্যমে কিন্তু শিক্ষা দেওয়া হয়। একদম ছোটবেলায় বাবা মা দেন, বাড়ির অন্যান্য লোকজন দেন, স্কুল দেয়, সবই কিন্তু ভাষার মাধ্যমে। যে শিক্ষা নিয়ন্ত্রণ প্রক্রিয়াটায় আমরা বড় হই, সেটা পুরোপুরি কিন্তু ভাষিক, লিঙ্গুইস্টিক, ভাষার মাধ্যমে হয়। এখানেও কিন্তু I mean, this entire speech is like a speech about the ideological formation of the human subject. How is the human subject ideologically formed? ওরা বললো এটা বন্ধুত্ব, ওরা বললো এটা ভালোবাসা, অর্থাৎ ওরা সমস্ত কিছু সোশ্যালি ডিফাইন করে দিল, আমাকে যেন অ্যাকসেপ্ট করতে হবে সেগুলো, কোনটা প্রেম, কোনটা বন্ধুত্ব, ইত্যাদি ইত্যাদি। And then there's again these very enigmatic lines. Then one day suddenly it ends, it changes. I don't understand. It dies, or it's me. I don't understand that either. I ask the words that remain. This is very much like Unnameable, almost an indirect citation of the Unnameable. I ask the words that remain, sleeping, waking, morning, evening. They've nothing to say. So we go back to Ham's memorable image of word into words, child into children. Again, I'm only asking the words to give me some illumination about these notions. So there's a certain failure of that ideological education. যে ideological education এর কথা এই স্পিচের শুরুতে বলা হয়েছিল, সেটা ফেল করছে, and Clove is becoming strange. He's not becoming a disciplined subject, disciplining in the Foucaultian sense, possibly. I open the door of the cell and go. I'm so bowed, I only see my feet. If I open my eyes, and between my legs, a little trail of black dust. Again, that joke around sexual impotence, which is always there in Beckett. I say to myself that Earth is extinguished, though I never saw it lit. It's easy going. When I drop, I'll weep for happiness. Almost a Keatsian crescendo. That last sentence is an echo of Keats, as it were. When I drop, I'll weep for happiness. This is the last speech Clove ever offers. And then Ham has his final one where he says, old endgame, lost of old, play and lose, and have done with losing and all of that. I'll just finish now with, these moments of discarding, where Ham keeps on discarding the objects one by one. The whistle he discards, throws away the gaff, throws away the toy dog. The dog, again, has a sort of all these sexual jokes associated with it. It's a toy dog being made. The sexual organ has not been put in there, so we don't know whether it's a male or a female dog. There are all these jokes around that. Again, I won't necessarily go into it. There's a circularity of the end in the beginning. So again, the play began with that reference to that bloody handkerchief, the old stancher, as Ham had called it. And it ends with that, when he puts on that handkerchief again back on his face, and he says, old stancher, you remain. The bloody handkerchief. So again, the last tableau, in a way, goes back to the opening scene. Things could start from here all over again. Clove could go out, come back again, or we could have the small boy coming back again. And there were perhaps a few things I could have said about the first draft of the play, and how it had a coffin on stage, and how Beckett wrote a slightly different ending initially, but then he chopped it off. So in the original ending of the play, Clove, or the Clove-like character, was supposed to come back and speak in another person's voice, confusing Ham a little bit, and finally he was supposed to sort of put him into the coffin. And the coffin as a physical object was very strongly present as a prop throughout the play. Of course, none of that exists in the final play, and I think Beckett must have made a wise decision there. This play is much more elliptical and much more appealing in a more general sense than that kind of a surrealist trope of the coffin on stage would have been, possibly. Nevertheless, so let me finish here, and of course, I mean, we could have questions. Thanks for staying with me.
Uh, I normally use the word thankful, but I think the word for today's lecture would be gratitude. I mean, I'm just amazed. I'm just amazed. But we have a number of very interesting questions. So let me just start hurriedly reading them out. But I can understand Orkoda is a little bit tired, so please bear with him. It's not very easy to go on for this long, and that too with such gusto.
No
So
problem.
I begin with Partho's question here. I'm just taking your name. You may be older than me or younger. Please bear with me for that as well. Good afternoon, sir. My question is that how far do you think Beckett struggled with language as a means of raw expression in his plays? Beckett said that he chose to write in French to depict this struggle since it was a foreign and awkward language which helped him to avoid the obscure labyrinth of ornamentation. So that's Partho's question.
Yeah, so thank you, Partho, for that question. You kind of answered the question yourself in a way, and you're right. So, as I said, Beckett chose to write in French because it was an acquired language, didn't come to him easily, and he wanted to get out of that comfort zone of